Hello everyone and welcome to our latest webinar, an introduction to the Sony HXR-NX100, Sony's latest camera. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rob Newton. I'm Marketing Manager here at Visual Impact and I'm going to be your host for this session. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Alister Chapman, experienced DoP and certified trainer for Sony. Hello Alister.
Hi everyone. Completely certified, absolutely mad, I'm sure, but we'll carry on anyway.
We'll carry on today, yes, I think so. Alister has over 25 years experience working in the broadcast industry, shooting commercials and documentaries, plus he runs workshops and training sessions, so a vast knowledge of industry knowledge on cameras and the working and how they operate in the field.
But it's all nonsense, really.
It is, yes, it is, but I think we'll just sort of pretend we actually know what we're on about today. And it's really good that we have him here today. Before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping. So on your screens there's a question box. Please use it. We want to make this presentation as engaging as possible. Alice is desperate for questions, so if you've got any questions on this or any topic you wish.
Help me out guys. Questions are really good. They make this a lot more interactive. They make it a lot more fun. Anybody that was here for the last session, actually, we got bombarded with questions right at the very end and almost ran out of time as a result. So get the questions in early. It really does help.
It does, yes, as Alistair said. So yeah, we want plenty of questions, plenty of interaction. We are recording today's webinar, so we'll send you a link tomorrow. So in case you missed it, or a colleague wants to listen in, then you've got that option. You may not know actually that we run open days and masterclass sessions, product launches here in Teddington. So if you're interested in getting your hands on the kit as opposed to just listening to it, then please check out our website www.visuals.co.uk for more details. I'll give you a sneak preview. We are running a post IBC Sony event at Pinewood Studios later on after IBC in September, end of September. So,
and if you haven't been to Sony's Pinewood facility, you really should grab that opportunity because there are a range of really good experts up there. There's a guy called Pablo who does the post-production side of things, and listening to him is absolutely fascinating. Very, very knowledgeable chap that really explains how to do really good post-production really well. So yeah, events in Pinewood, the VI sponsored one, really, yeah, look out for that because that'll be well worth attending.
Yes, it really is, really is. Okay, before we start, we just want to do an audience poll, just so that we can help Alistair adapt his presentation to the profile of the audience we have out there. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking on there and answering the question, have you made the leap to file-based or tapeless recording yet? We've got various options. Yes, already there. No, but almost there. No, but we need to move and make the leap. Or I'm not really convinced of the benefits of file-based yet.
I want to see if anybody ticks the last one. Not convinced of the benefits. Let's see. Everyone's going to click it now just to spite us.
That's
just
right.
They can now. I've said that.
So we've got quite a few. Yes, over 67% have already made the leap to file-based.
I'm quite surprised to see 30% saying no, but we need to. Because I could never go back. I mean, now I'm totally file-based. I haven't really touched tape. I was just actually staring at my shelves, which are still covered in tapes the other day, and thinking, God, I'm going to need to transfer that stuff to something else pretty soon. I really could never go back. It was one of the best things that ever happened going to file-based.
Sure.
I couldn't go back. Is that everybody? I think that's 88%.
Yeah, I think we've got most people voted now. Okay. So we'll end that now and move on to the webinar as it is. So as I say, I'd like to thank Alistair and
questions.
And we'll don't forget the questions.
Yes, keep them coming.
Questions, keep them coming. And
we have a grand total of none so far.
Yes, but I'm sure that will get going once you've started the presentation. People have got various things they want to ask. So
that one goes at the end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so if you've listened to one of my presentations before, you've seen this before. So this is one of the things that I shoot: natural extremes, severe weather, hurricanes, tornadoes, all kinds of things. So a lot of very much run and gun type shooting. But in terms of my experience, where do I come from? Well, I started in this business shooting motor racing for the BBC, doing in-car cameras, 16mm film shooting. and then went on to do all kinds of really actually quite cool stuff, windsurfing, snowboarding, stuff like that. As a young lad, it was a long time ago now, had a lot of fun traveling around the world doing those sorts of things. So I come from a documentary shooting background, also did many years and still do shoot a lot of corporate videos. So, while these big sensor cameras like the FS7 and things like that are very popular still, and that is actually predominantly what I shoot with, there really is still a need for compact, easy to use cameras, maybe not as your primary camera, perhaps as your second camera or as a backup camera. So Sony launched this camera, the HXR-NX100. I first came across it earlier this year at Broadcast Asia, and it's actually quite a good little camera. It's small, it's compact, it's built to be cost effective. It features Sony's XAVC S codec, AVC HD, and standard definition DV recording, so it can still do standard definition. It's an HD camera, but one of the interesting things about it is that it has a 1-inch sensor. So it has a sensor that's a fair bit bigger than what you normally find in this type of camera. And these types of cameras generally have a sensor that's maybe 1/3 inch or 1/2 inch, which is very small. Having that bigger sensor brings some benefits, which we'll look at in a moment. Now, a lot of confusion actually as to where this 1-inch sensor size measurement comes from. What does it mean? Well, historically, it actually comes from the size of the tube in the old-fashioned tube cameras. Now, I was privileged, is that the right word to say?
I think
to
so.
have shot with some of these, and they were heavy, they were bulky. You had to do all sorts of crazy things like put tubes in the freezer to make them last longer and all sorts of nuts stuff with them. Basically, they were a complete pain in the backside because they constantly needed realignment and got very hot and used a huge amount of power. Anyway, inside them were tubes instead of chips, and these tubes had a flat surface on the front of them where the image was created, and the 1-inch or the sensor size dimension originally stems from the size of the outside diameter of that tube. So it would have been a 1-inch diameter tube. Now what you have to remember, of course, though, is that the actual active area, your 4x3 area, has to fit within that 1-inch. So it's always going to be smaller than 1 inch. In the old days, we were 4x3, which kind of fits fairly well onto a round tube. But now, of course, we're talking about 16x9. So 1 inch is actually a lot smaller than 1 inch. We call it a 1-inch sensor because it refers to the very old standards based on these 1-inch tubes, or even 2/3 inch tubes. With a 2/3 inch camera, it's not the measurement of the diagonal. That's actually much smaller than a 1 inch, but it's the size that would have fitted if it had been a 1-inch tube. So that's where that size comes from, and why 1 inch isn't actually 1 inch. Clear as mud, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on. So just looking at sensor sizes that are commonly used today in the video and filmmaking world. And for some reason, this slide does a really weird build. So here we have the sensors in use today that you'll find all over the place. Everything from your full frame 35mm stills camera, the top there, biggest one, down to 1/3 inch video sensor that you often find in these small handycam type cameras. And if you look at this, you see that 1 inch is actually fractionally bigger than 2/3 inch, and it's around about the same size as Super 16mm movie film. So what that means is that this camera is going to give you very similar depth of field and performance in many cases to a 2/3 inch camera or a Super 16 movie camera. It's a little bit bigger than 2/3, so it will give you shallower depth of field than a 2/3 inch camera. If we look at these are comparing really the 1 inch with the 1/3 inch sensor in particular, and you really can see how much bigger that 1 inch type sensor is than a 1/3 inch sensor. And a bigger sensor means many things. It means bigger pixels. We have more space, so we can put bigger pixels on the sensor, or we can put more pixels on there. And that means either higher resolution or better sensitivity, or even a bit of both, because we can have a lot of pixels and they can all be quite big. So we get good low light performance, but still lots of pixels, and that gives us a very high quality image. Now, just looking at field of views, these slides were actually created really for comparing a super 35mm sensor. So the overall image, this image here, is what you would see if you were shooting with a super 35mm sensor. This is what you would get with a 2/3 inch sensor. 1 inch would be very slightly wider than that, 1/2 inch, and then 1/3 inch. And you can see that that 1/2 inch, that 1 inch or that 2/3 inch frame field of view is much wider than you get from a 1/3 inch sensor. And this means that you're going to get nice shallow field of view. You're going to get that more filmic look. It's going to look like it's been shot with a much really sort of higher end, higher quality camera. Now, there's another camera on the market from Sony, the PXW-X70, which is very, very similar in many respects to the NX100. And at this stage, I think one nice thing would be just to look at the differences between these two cameras, and to try and sort of figure out, because I think a lot of people, this is going to be one of the tough decisions if they're looking for a second camera, a B camera maybe to supplement something else, or if they're in this market for a camera at this price point, because they're very similar, which one of these two do you buy? The PXW-X70, which is already a very popular camera, or the new HXR-NX100? So in a little bit more detail. So the price of the NX100 is around about £1,500. You can't actually buy them yet. They're not quite released just yet. And the PXW-X70 is around about 1,800. The NX100 is very much a pro style camera body. If you were to turn up on a shoot with the NX100, your customers, your clients would straight away see a professional looking camera. The X70, that's a little bit more debatable, especially if you were to take the hand grip off. It really is based on a consumer camera. It is very small. It looks like a fancy home video camera, whereas the NX100 is clearly a professional camera. The NX100 is from Sony's NX cam range, while the X70 is from the XD cam range. And that basically means that the codecs in the camera are different. So the NX100 has XAVC-S, which is 8-bit, 420, up to 50 megabits per second, really high quality. AVC HD or DV, while the X70 is XAVC at 50 megabit, 10-bit, and the MPEG-2 HD and DV cam. The the NX100 is HD only, and there are currently no plans to offer a 4K upgrade for this camera. It really is targeted at HD only, while the X70 comes from the factory as HD only, but you can upgrade it for extra money. It's not a free upgrade by any means, to 4K if you need 4K. Both have the same sensor, and on the face of it, the lenses look the same, but they are actually very different lenses. The main thing being that the 12 times zoom on the NX100 has separate rings for zoom, focus, and iris, while the X70 only has one multifunction ring. And when I've used both of these cameras, I've shot with the X70 and I've shot with the NX100, and I was actually really surprised how much smoother, and things like controlling the lens for zoom and things like that, how much better that was with the NX100 than the X70. The X100 really is a more professional lens. The NX100 has a lot of assignable buttons, so you can customize it and tailor it, whereas the X70 doesn't. It's basically, it has a touchscreen LCD instead for a lot of your multifunction options.
Alister, do you think the HD only option is a bit of a mistake from Sony?
Well, I had a chat with some of the guys from Sony about this yesterday, actually, because I knew that this might be something that was raised in the session, and the answer was the only way they could get the price down to what it was by making it a done deal. This is the camera, this is what we're going to deliver, we're going to get it all right coming out of the factory, and we're not going to then spend more money adding upgrades and options to it later, and that way we can make it cheap, we can make it low cost.
Okay.
Is it a mistake to do that? If I was Sony, I think I would at least keep it open as an option to do it in the future.
Sure.
I think at this level of camera, HD actually works really well, and we'll see some pictures later. I've got some images to show you from the camera, and the picture quality in HD is really, really good. And there does become a point as well, do you go for 4K? Because 4K workflow, you need a more powerful computer, your files are bigger, it's more complex. Maybe you're not, especially actually with a camera recording onto SD cards, because this records onto SD cards, SDXC for XAVC, is you're limited with your bit rate. So when you go to 4K, yes, it's higher resolution, but it's also much more highly compressed.
Yeah.
So you then start to introduce compression artifacts, which takes away some of the benefits of having 4K. So it's not necessarily clear cut. I mean, the 4K wouldn't necessarily automatically be better. Sure. It would be more resolution, but it would have more artifacts in it because of the requirement to make it small enough to fit on SD cards.
Sure. But
I think Sony should have at least kept it, or at least, certainly what you read on the website is there are no plans to add 4K currently. That's the party line from Sony. Okay. So who knows in the future, perhaps, but right now it's an HD camera, and if you're going to buy one, don't consider it for 4K. No. You're buying an HD camera, but it's a very nice one.
Excellent. Okay.
The sensor has 20 megapixels in total, 4.2 effective, because remember this is a big square sensor, but you're only using sort of the center area of it for your 16:9 and 4:3 shooting. Uses Sony's Exmor-R back illuminated technology, and that means that actually with a CMOS sensor there's lots of wires and transistors and other bits that with a conventional sensor are actually in front of the light gathering part, and they cut down the amount of light that gets to the pixels. With the back illuminated sensors, they've managed to put all of those transistors and those other bits behind the light gathering part of the sensor. The sensor is effectively manufactured back to front, and that makes it more sensitive. Even though it is a big pixels, they are still relative, it's a big sensor, they are still relatively small pixels, but by using the back illuminated technology, you can make up for that. And it does give you really good sensitivity and actually really, really low noise performance. That's one of the things that strikes me with this camera, the NX100 and also the X70 as well, is how little noise there is in the pictures. They're really clean images, and that means you can do a lot in post-production with those pictures. Mm-hmm. And again, I've got some examples I'll show you.
Excellent.
So obviously, image quality, what's image quality, right, is like. Now, I had the camera recently over a weekend for some shooting that I was doing. It's part of a project that I'm working on at the moment. One of my hobbies is a sport called airsoft. These are not real guns. They look like real guns, but they're not. It's a bit like paintball, if anybody's ever done that. Basically, it gives a chance for 50-year-old guys like me to run around in the woods and pretend to be children again. Although I haven't ever really stopped being a child, I don't think, sometimes. Anyway, I took it out to film some of these activities, and it's actually a really challenging lighting scenario. It was actually pouring down. It was in and out heavy showers and rain. The summer has just been rubbish this year. And you can see you've got really bright highlights, shafts of light coming down through the trees. You've got very dark under the tree canopy, because it's the middle of the summer, so the trees are covered in leaves. Yet you still have a really nice high quality image, really good contrast and very low noise. Another example here, just zoomed in a little bit, and it's really a very pleasing image from these cameras. Yeah. I think Sony are really getting this right now. In the last few years, there's been some nice improvements in their colorimetry, color response, the way the detail correction, things like that's applied to the pictures. That is improving the look we're getting out of these cameras. And again, this is a very high contrast shot. This guy in the foreground is in deep shadow under the trees. You have very bright sunshine in the field beyond the woods, and the camera's handling it really well. The greens aren't unnaturally blowing out. They are on the edge of being overexposed, but they're doing it in a very pleasant, quite a nice way. Now, to record these pictures, you do have quite a few codec choices in the camera. You have XAVCS, and that's at 25 or 50 frames per second, and up to 50 megabits per second. And it's worth pointing out that this is a country area specific camera. So if you're in Europe, you'll be getting the PAL version, and if you're in the USA or parts of Asia, you'll get an NTSC version. So it's not a multi-region camera like the higher end cameras like the FS7, where you can actually switch it between PAL area and NTSC. This just comes in the one country area. You have AVC HD at up to 50 frames per second at 28 megabits per second. And AVC HD and XAVC, they're actually very similar codecs. They both use H.264 encoding, lots of similarities. But XAVC-S is a really nice codec. The 50 megabit per second XAVC-S really holds together extremely well. And that really allows you to grade the footage and manipulate the footage, which actually allows this camera to punch way above its price point. And we'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. AVC HD, 25 frames per second. For smaller files, if you need lots and lots of storage on your SD cards, 24 and 17 megabits per second. But to be honest now, SD cards are so cheap that why would anybody use anything smaller than a 16 or even a 32 gigabyte card now? A 32 gigabyte card, XAVC-S at 50 megabits per second, is still going to give you over an hour of storage. And those cards are cheap now. These are really cheap. It's cheap media. In fact, actually, me personally, when I'm using XAVC-S in a camera that and I'm recording onto SDXC cards, so if you use XDSC for XAVC-S, I treat them like tapes. The cards are so cheap, I'll buy some of the lower cost 16 or 32 gigabyte cards and just keep them. You know, if they're so cheap now, you just keep them, don't need to transfer your material off them anymore. As I've already mentioned, we've got DV Cam 50i only interlaced. Anybody out there still shooting in interlaced? In SD in interlaced? I'm not sure. I know. I tell you, if you are shooting in SD and interlace, I would love to know, and please tell me what it is that you are shooting in SD and interlace. So send a question saying, hey, I'm still shooting in SD and interlace. Not that I'm looking down my nose at you or anything. I'm just really curious as to whether anybody still is and for what.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, to come back to XAVC-S, how good is it? So here we have a frame taken with the NX100, deep shadow, probably a little bit underexposed. Guy sitting under a tree, looks really, really dark. So what can we do with this material in post-production? How much can we push it? What can we pull out of this image? So this is the original image. Let's have a look at it full frame. So that's our full frame image, and on the face of it, it looks really dark. Well, it is. Let's not pretend it's underexposed. And you would expect with most cameras actually to really struggle to pull anything decent out of that. So the first thing to look at actually is how little noise there is in this picture. You look in the deep blacks, there's virtually no noise, and that's really going to help us. So I did a simple grade on this in Premiere just to brighten it up. Just very simple, raising raising the mid-range, brightening it up a little bit, and still a great looking image. No problem there. Still not grainy, still not noisy, no issues at all. So quite happily you can see that from that underexposed image we could pull out a perfectly usable image. No problem at all. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the XAVC-S codec is very robust. It has very, very minimal compression artifacts. 50 megabits for H.264 is really lightly compressed. So there's very few compression artifacts. So we can really grade this, we can really push it before it starts falling apart. Combine that with the low noise levels from this large sensor, and we have something we can really work with. So then from here I decided, well, let's push it some more. So I then applied a film grade. So I used Adobe Premiere and applied a Lumetri film grade to it. Completely different look again. But again, the image is holding up absolutely fine. And do remember, the initial image was underexposed. And that actually then starts to open up some interesting possibilities with this camera. So I'm just going to back up a few slides here a minute. Because if we go to this shot here, and you look at it and you think, well, it's borderline overexposed, but then you also keep in your mind that, well, actually, because this grades so well, I could bring up those darker parts of the picture with ease and without it being an issue. Then you could see we could possibly even have underexposed it by another stop. Treat it in the grade, and those highlights are going to be absolutely no problem at all. So it really does sort of mean that this camera will handle these difficult lighting situations very well, provided that you're prepared to do a little bit of work, and this is a very easy, very quick, simple correction to do in post, to really pull the very best out of the camera. It's really does, as I say, I think punch well above its weight. And if you're only looking at this on a small screen, just so you can see what's really going on, so this has been blown up 300%, so this is 3 times bigger than the original. We're just looking at the very center of that same frame. This is the original image, and then this is the graded image. And if you look at the skin tones in particular, you can see just how much I'm actually able to pull out of this footage and the deep dark shadows. There is a lot of picture information in there if you want to pull it out and the picture doesn't get particularly noisy. Yeah, you can sort of see that. Let me see, can you see that in this area down here? There is some noise. It's not absolutely totally noise free, but in a moving picture, if you were to play this as a video clip, you really barely notice that at all. It's very small, it's very insignificant.
Just got a quick question come in actually, and someone's been asking, is that flexibility down to the sensor or the codecs being used, or a combination, I guess?
It's a combination. You've got a sensor that's through a combination of good image processing and the size of the sensor, relatively low noise. And what the thing that normally limits how much you can grade anything in post-production is noise.
Right.
If your picture is noisy and grainy, as soon as you start to grade it, it becomes noisier and grainier always. It doesn't matter how your grade goes really, and that tends to limit what you can do with any camera. And there's several sources of noise. So there's noise that's coming from the sensor itself, noise from processing, and noise from your encoding. So compression artifacts generally are a form of noise in your picture. All those little buzzy edges and things like that you get, mosquito noise, quantization, all the technical terms, generally manifest themselves within the picture as a form of noise. So they limit how much you can grade. Get a good sensor with low noise, with good image processing and a good codec that isn't adding artifacts or extra noise, you'll be able to grade your picture really very well. And that's what's happening here with this camera. We have a low noise sensor with a great codec, and as a result, you can really push it and pull an image out of this camera that really is, for the price of the camera, it's exceptionally good.
Sure. Just another question. Does that mean that you need to have an expensive sort of grading software to be able to do it?
No, in terms of software, all I used for this was Adobe Premiere Pro, the latest version. I subscribe to the Creative Cloud model. I know not everybody is a fan of paying out money every month for their software, but to be honest, it's not a lot of money, and it does mean that I've always got the latest up-to-date tools, and I've got the whole suite of tools. I personally think it's a bargain, because to be honest, when you had to go out and buy Photoshop and buy Premiere and those things, they were not cheap.
No, hundreds of pounds.
It was a major investment, and they did become out of date, and you kept having to update them, which cost more money. So now I pay a very, I don't think it's a lot, fixed amount each month. I have my Creative Cloud account, so I can use that for collaborating with my clients. I can upload projects onto there. They can go through, they can look at a project, they can type in what they want changed and highlight things like that. So it's a whole, as a package, I think it's very good. So that was Adobe Premiere Pro, but you could use FCP. If you are recording in XAVC-S, you really need to be in one of the professional edit applications. Right, so you can't use, I can't think what Apple's consumer edit package is anymore, but you need to be in that sort of professional end. So FCP, Adobe Premiere, Edius, Catalyst Edit from Sony, and that sort of league, really. If you were shooting with AVC HD, well, that's essentially a consumer codec, then you can use a lot of the consumer level packages. In fact, AVC HD at the lower bit rates, you can edit on an iPad or on your iPhone even. So it does, and this is actually one of the interesting things about this camera, because it does sort of bridge that gap almost between consumer and the pro end in terms of the codecs. It does open up some other options with image processing, because you can do stuff with a lot of consumer apps on an iPad, on an iPhone, something very, very basic in the field on location that you can't do when you're using a professional codec.
Okay. We've got another question.
Another one. Yes.
Yeah. Is shooting HD okay for low-end corporates, or should I be looking
to shoot in 4K? I love 4K because it does bring me a lot of flexibility in post. I can shoot an interview in 4K, I can frame it as a wide shot, and then from that wide shot I can cut out a mid shot and a close-up. Basically I get what a fake 3-camera shoot with 1 camera in 4K. So 4K does bring benefits even if you're not delivering in 4K. We have 4K Blu-ray is now being ratified, will be available for Christmas this year. You'll be able to go out and buy a 4K Blu-ray player and there'll be movies in 4K. Netflix is now doing more and more 4K, so 4K is coming. I was shopping for a new TV. I'm in the market for a new TV right now, and I was looking only at 4K TVs. I'm not going to buy an HD TV now, and they aren't really any more expensive than HD now.
No.
And if you do 4K really well, it can look stunning.
Yeah.
But you've got to do it really, really well. And really, if that's what you want to do, if you want to produce 4K productions, you want to go to the FS7. You want to go to the large sensor cameras to really get all the benefits of a 4K production. Shooting 4K on this camera, even if it could do 4K, I'm not sure it's going to give you a huge amount of benefits. Yes, you'll be able to crop into the image a bit. You'll be able to do a bit more image manipulation, things like that, but it's not a massive benefit. And that benefit comes with the penalty of bigger file sizes, needing more processing power in your computer, renders taking longer and all of that sort of thing.
Yep.
For corporate video, I don't think a lot of the benefits are there yet.
Sure.
In the future, yeah, absolutely. But right now, right at this point in time, there are benefits, but at this level, at this price point, I think HD is probably the way to go. This is the best. This is where this camera excels. This is where this camera works best.
Yeah.
You know, shoot it in HD, get great HD, deliver great HD to your clients, and they'll be very happy. In the corporate world, I don't think many clients are asking for 4K just yet.
Okay, brilliant.
Coming back to the camera, one of the things we have a 12 times optical zoom, especially designed for this camera. And one of the nice features they have something called clear image zoom. So this is and I hate using the term digital zoom because everybody associates digital zoom with a drop in image quality. Because when it was first introduced, digital zooms on video cameras, they sucked. You zoomed in and the picture just went, ugh. Yeah, well, it just degraded and looked horrible. With this camera, you can't tell when it's operating. You turn it on and it's seamless. The zoom rocker on the lens just zooms in and out, and you just switch seamlessly from optical to digital, and the whole process is seamless. And when you look at the footage, you can't tell which is which. You really can't.
Right.
If you do need to get a really, really long shot, it also has a 48 times digital extender. When you do use that, though, there is a definite noticeable drop in image quality. But I guess it's a useful function for news. If you're using this camera for news and you really needed to punch in on a shot to get that a little bit longer, it would be handy. But really, I would stick to the 24 times clear image zoom. If I needed to go tighter than that, you can always do it in post. You can just zoom in a bit in the edit. How good is it? So here is our 12 times zoom. At this shot, unfortunately, I was actually shooting handheld. This was not tripod, which is a shame. The camera has an optical steady shot, which is very, very good, and it does allow you to get really pretty stable shots, even handheld. So that's 12 times, and then that's the 24 times. And again, if you look at the face, this is where I'm focused. I'm focused on the guy's face, and you look at the detail, the skin tone, and everything else. There's no drop in quality that's appreciable. Certainly no worse than actually if you had a 24 times optical zoom, because even with an optical zoom at 24 times, you're going to get some change in image quality. It's not at this price point, it's not going to be perfect with a 24 times zoom lens throughout the entire range. So it's a really nice feature. It's very effective. It works. It does what it says on the tin, and you know, I really like it, and I use it. And for this shoot, I left it switched on. Yeah, trying to handhold a camera at 24 times is a bit silly, really. Should have had a monopod or a tripod, but it is effective. It does work. The lens, 3 rings to control it: iris, focus, and zoom. The NX70, the other camera we looked at, is only one multifunction ring, and that makes it much faster and easier to work with this camera. If I need to make an exposure change, I just turn the aperture ring. If I need to zoom in and out, I can turn the zoom ring. If I need to adjust my focus, I can turn the focus ring. Simple, easy. You know, when you're in a hurry, when you're in a rush doing something quickly, that's what you want. You don't want anything complicated. You don't want to have to press a button to change the function of that ring. So that makes it really easy to use. Unfortunately, the focus ring is one of those round and round and round and round where it stops nobody knows focus rings, but it's still reasonably repeatable. I still prefer a focus ring with a calibrated scale and everything, but again, you've got to remember how much this camera costs. This is a low-cost camera. The focus is responsive. The autofocus is actually very good. I was very pleased with the autofocus. I used it on this shoot quite a bit. 5-6 years ago, if you'd asked me would I ever use autofocus on a professional camera, I'd have laughed at you and said, no, that's for amateurs. But now I'm not so sure. I think autofocus systems are getting much, much better on these cameras. It's much more reliable, it's much more consistent. And you know, the other thing is, of course, I'm 5 years older now, so my eyesight isn't quite what it used to be either. So sometimes having a bit of help from autofocus is quite nice.
Not a bad thing.
You know, cameras like the FS7 and other cameras with their very sophisticated autofocus systems, it's getting there. I don't think we're quite there yet, but in the photography world, you know, when autofocus first came out with stills cameras, everyone laughed at it initially and was like, that's for amateurs. But you look now, and you know, you look at the way most pros shoot, they shoot with autofocus because it now has got to the point where it can be more accurate than we can and faster.
Yep.
It's a little bit harder with video. With a stills camera, it's one photograph.
Yeah.
And then the camera can refocus one photograph, refocus one photograph. So with the video camera, it's much harder because it's got to stay in focus all the time while you're shooting, which is actually very difficult to do because no matter what system you use, you can't tell whether you're in and out of focus unless you go out of focus. I mean, it's the same with a cameraman. A cameraman doesn't know whether he's in focus until he's gone slightly out of focus first. So, you know, even we're not infallible and perfect. But autofocus is getting there. It really is. You have ND filters as well. So 4 ND filters, clear, quarter, 1/16 and 1/64. So a really good range of ND. And actually, one thing's coming back to that, when you have these cameras with 1/3" sensors, very, very small sensors, one problem you have is something called diffraction limiting. And that's when you have a very, very small aperture and a very small sensor. The light that passes around the edge of the aperture ring is defocused because when light hits a sharp edge, it bends. So when you have very small apertures and very small sensors, if you imagine if you bend the light that's falling on a small sensor because the sensor is small, it doesn't take much of a bend to make it out of focus. Whereas when your sensor is big, that same small bend has much less of an impact. So when you have a very small sensor, you can't use small apertures without pictures going soft. So on a 1/3" camera, even f8 is going to make your pictures soft. f16, they're going to be unusable. And even f5.6, you might notice some softening. So when you have these very small sensor cameras, the cameras you typically find in this type of body, they suffer from this diffraction effect, and the pictures are very easy to make soft just by having the wrong aperture. When you go to this camera with the 1" sensor, that big sensor, that problem goes away. You can use f16 on this camera quite comfortably, and your pictures won't be soft. And I suppose the f11, there's no difference on this camera. f16, you might just about see a difference, but it gives you a much better, much wider usable aperture range than on a small sensor camera, and that just makes the camera easier to use because you don't have to keep flipping out different levels of ND all the time. Audio-wise, professional audio, XLR audio in, of course, the phantom power. We also have Sony's MI shoe on the handle, so you can put the UWP-D radio mics on there, direct connection to the camera, no wires, no cables. The mic receiver is powered by the camera. The audio passes directly into the camera without a wire or cable. It's a very neat solution, really good for corporate work, things like that. Just keeps things nice and tidy. You can also put video light and other things on the MI shoe as well. And you have manual and automatic audio gain. And all controlled by switches on the side of the camera body, so it's really easy, it's fast. You haven't got to go into the menus to switch stuff around, so it makes it a very quick camera to use.
Sure, we just got a question about that actually. It says, where do you put a second receiver if there's only one hot shoe?
Pass. Yeah, no, good point. If there is only one hot shoe, where do you put the other receiver? Let me just trying to think about the top of the camera from what I can remember. Because sometimes Sony will put a second shoe on the back of the handle, but they haven't done that on this one by the looks of things. I don't have a camera to hand or a picture of the top of one right here, so I don't remember if they put a second shoe on the back of the handle. I'll have to pass, and it's a valid and good point. I mean, generally, one of the things I often do is I'll just, if I'm using a radio mic receiver, I often clip the little wire clip over the back of the strap that goes around your hand in the hand grip, and I hang one off there and have one on the top of the camera. So that's one thing I'll often do it that way anyway. I don't like actually having too much weight on the top of the camera, because if you are hand holding the camera, it does make it very top heavy. Or if your tripod's a little bit wobbly as well, the higher up you put stuff on the camera, the more it's going to wobble on that tripod. So I tend to want to put stuff low down if possible anyway. But yeah, it is a good point.
Okay, well, we'll try and come back to you with a firm answer on that later on.
Exposure control, fully manual. You can independently select each of the gain, white balance, shutter, and aperture controls. There aren't switches. There isn't a gain, high, A, B, and preset switch or a shutter switch. It is done through buttons, but there is a separate button for each control, and it's very easy just to select the one or to select two just by pressing the button that you want to control that function. So it is, you know, nice and easy camera to drive manually if you choose. On the X70, actually, one of the things of the X70 is the way the manual controls works a little bit funky sometimes. You press one and you've got to press it again to come out of that. It gets a little bit confusing. I prefer the way it works on the NX100. You have dual card slots, so you can record either simultaneously onto two cards for security. Again, the cards are so cheap, there's almost like, why not do it this way? Put two cards in, record, mirrored recording onto each card, so both exactly the same. If you lose a card, no problem, you've got the other card as a backup. If a card becomes corrupt, no problem, you've got the other card as a backup. If you're doing news, it means you can take a card out and hand it over to the bike courier to take back to the news station, while you keep your copy for editing in the field and location. So, you know, really good for those sorts of applications. If you need longer record times, if you're doing long events like weddings, conferences, things like that, you can relay record. And one of the nice things, actually, if you use the AVC HD codec, put a couple of 64 gigabyte cards in there and you can shoot practically all day without ever needing to take a card out or do anything else. And you know, SD, XC, they're cheap, they're readily available. You know, you can, if you're flying somewhere, you can pick them up in the airport in Dixon's, or you can buy them on Amazon, wherever. One caveat to that is I still don't trust buying media on eBay. Buy it from a reputable source, get it from VI, whatever. You'll know it's the real deal. You're not going to run into buying a load of fake media. It's going to let you down. So do be careful where you do buy your media. It is worth paying a little bit more to guarantee that what you're getting is the real thing. There's an awful lot of fake media out there, and you can't tell looking at it. It looks like the real deal. Output-wise, you have HDMI, composite out, standard definition, of course, audio line out and headphone socket. No SDI on this camera, so but you do have HDMI, provided you're careful with the cable and everything else. HDMI works fine. Very low power and long battery life, so it runs off the standard NPF batteries. They're readily available. If you don't have any of these, I don't know where you've been. I think almost every camera probably has at least a couple of those sitting around in their workshop or office somewhere, and they last for hours. The 770, which is the one that comes from the camera, I didn't actually flatten it in the day shooting that I had. I mean, I'm not saying it lasts all day, but you know, shooting on and off throughout the day, I think I shot for around about 2 or 3 hours at least the last time I used this camera, and the battery was still good at the end of the day. No dramas at all. So really good battery life, and they're cheap, readily available, they're lightweight, they don't weigh a lot, easy to travel with and things like that. So really that's the NX100. There's not much more I can say about it. It's not a fancy super duper camera. It doesn't have, you know, the log and all this other stuff, but then it doesn't need it. It is what it says on the tin, which is a low cost, good solid camera for corporate productions. I would actually very seriously consider one of these for myself as a backup camera, as a second camera. It's a really good camera to have for that application. It's going to give you good pictures. It's uncomplicated. You can hand it off to a PA, to the producer director, to go and grab some shots, and they're going to come back with hopefully some nice shots that you can use. And it really is that simple. Now we've got a question is, does this camera have a LANC socket? Yes, it does. It's a multi-pin, multi-purpose socket, it does a multifunction socket, but it does have LANC on it, so you can control zoom and things like that remotely with a standard LANC connector. So again, low cost. LANC is great because it's cheap.
Yes.
You know, it'd be silly to have a camera like this and then make people use expensive, high-end follow focuses and things on it. LANC is good. LANC's low cost, and it works. So,
sure.
So yeah. So that is the NX100. Questions coming flooding in suddenly. Thank you from David there. Welcome, David. That's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do. You have a lot of options in this market now with these lower cost cameras. So do your homework, take a look, get your hands on one. It is always the best thing to do. You know, rent one, hire one, try one before you put your money down on it. But I really liked it. It really sort of fits that little niche in the market for a low cost basic camera.
So as a conclusion, then you would say, in terms of, you know, affordability and what it'll do, then it's.
I think it's good. It's bang for the buck. Is what you're getting is a lot of bang for your buck. Obviously, your choice is between this one and the X70.
Yeah.
They're not that far apart price wise. If I was a corporate producer and my main business was corporate video, I would get the NX100, and the reason I'd get the NX100 is because it looks like a professional piece of kit. You know, the X70 is a great little camera, it really is, but there's something about it that just doesn't, it's too small, it's too compact, it just doesn't look like a pro piece of kit.
Sure.
And I think, you know, that is important. You turn up, a corporate client, your customer is paying you to come and produce a production for you, and maybe for wedding videos and things like that as well. They do expect you to turn up with a professional camera. Now, 5-10 years ago, this wouldn't have been a professional camera because it's too small. But these days, of course, you know, people are shooting videos on their camera phones and tiny cameras. So this is now the professional level of camera, and it does look the business, and that is still important. You can't ignore that. You can't just rock up with your iPhone to shoot a corporate video. I mean, yeah, okay. No. The reality is the iPhone can make good pictures, and you might actually produce a really good video with the iPhone, but that's not what your customer's going to expect. The customer expects you to turn up with a professional piece of kit if they're paying you to do the job.
Yeah.
Got one more question. We're running low on time, but we'll get a few more in if any more come in. I'm currently using a Sony NX5. In your opinion, has the technology improved a lot to make a change to this camera, which is much cheaper than the NX5 was 4 years ago? Oh, that's always a tough one. NX5 is a good camera. It still is a good camera. It's a file-based camera, it's solid state, it's NX cam, it's ABC HD. What I would say is the XABC-S codec in this camera is a big step up from ABC HD. It is a better codec. But you know, while I'm here sitting next to Rob from Visual Impact, and I'm sure he'd love me to say, buy this new camera, spend your money.
Yes.
The reality is, if your NX5 is still, if it's doing what you need it to do, don't change. No. You know, if you've got a camera and it does what you need, don't change just because they brought out a new model. But if you are looking to upgrade, maybe you are looking to get a B camera, a second camera, this would certainly be, you know, one well worth looking at. And in terms of picture quality, oh, maybe this is slightly better than the NX5. I think it's a little bit better. The big thing is that big sensor. You have that 1-inch sensor. That's going to give you a shallower depth of field. It's not that super shallow, super 35 look, but it's much more like a 2/3 inch camera. It's a more pleasing look. It's a nicer depth of field. You have more control. You have a bit more artistic and creative control with this camera than you have with the NX5. In a corporate situation, it's just a silly little thing like maybe you're doing your interview, you've got a guy sat in an office at a desk. You might put a few objects on the desk just to dress it up a little bit. And with the NX100, it's going to be much easier to throw the focus out on those foreground or background objects than it will be with the NX5. And that just gives it a little bit of a less video look, a little bit more film look, less video look. So yeah, it is a nice camera and it does bring you that benefit. I've got one more slide here because next week is IBC.
Yes, as if we didn't know.
Oh God. If you haven't been to IBC, go have a look. It's an experience. It's quite something. It's vast. It is just, but I don't think most people that haven't been have any idea how big the place is. That this is an old car factory where they hold it, and it's just vast, and it's worth the trip. It's an eye opener. So, and getting to Amsterdam these days is really cheap. EasyJet, BA, whoever they fly. There's loads and loads of flights, but you can go on the ferry, whatever. So if you haven't been, go. But those of us that go regularly, it's like, oh God, IBC, my feet are going to hurt and everything else because we've seen it before many times. But it is an experience. Don't ask me what is going to be there because if I did know, I wouldn't be able to say. I can't say. I'm under NDA. So, but keep an eye on the websites and the forums and all the various chatter. I'm sure there will be product launches from most of the manufacturers. It's IBC. It's one of the big events of the year. So it is a place where everyone likes to show off new things. If you do go to IBC, the thing you should seek out and look for is HDR, high dynamic range. This is the new thing. This is where the real wow factor is in video now. 4K is cool. 4K is nice. I like 4K. I've already said that. But HDR has that wow factor because HDR stands out. It looks different. Even on a small TV in people's living rooms, HDR is going to have that real wow factor. Okay. It's here. It's now. Amazon, Netflix, they are already broadcasting HDR. You can buy, if you've got deep enough pockets, you can buy a nice OLED HDR TV right now. There are also HDR active LED panels coming that are sort of a halfway house. It's LCD technology, but using active LED to gain HDR. It's not as good as OLED, but it's certainly an improvement over what we currently have. So if you go to IBC, go and see the HDR demos because they will blow you away. It's really impressive stuff, and actually I'm really excited about HDR.
Something to look forward to then. And certainly if you do go to IBC, as Alistair said, is it an experience? If you don't manage to get there because of work commitments or any other reason, then we are sending a team from Visual Impact over to IBC, and we'll be interviewing people like Alistair over on the stands just to get a sense of what is the hit product of the exhibition this year, and we'll be relaying all of that back via a podcast or a webinar that you can easily listen to either in your car or on the plane or wherever you are, as well as it being live on our website. So please check our website out if you're interested in listening to people like Alistair talk about what's going on at IBC actually while they're there at IBC, not a week or so later. So that's hot news for you if you want to listen to that. I think we've had all the questions. Thanks very much for listening and joining in and making it as interactive as possible. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again.